So the first big milestone was getting the LOI, but the next critical piece was then, informing the partners, and in this case, the partners who are the managing members, that there's been an offer, that this transaction now is ready to move to its next phase and stage, and those partners now need to engage into the process. So it's essentially bringing them into the fold now and moving on to the next step.
Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Cashing Out, brought to you each week by Hoban Law. With me today is my co-host, Dena Jalbert from Aligned Business Advisory Service. Hey, Dena.
Hey, Dan.
How's it going?
It's going well. Good to be back on the show.
Yeah. Unfortunately, our legal advisor, Larry Mishkin from Mishkin Law and Hoban Law, will not be with us today. He's presenting at a cannabis conference, so it's just going to be the two of us today.
Cool.
I'm almost at the beginning of the show, I started to say brought to you each week by Hoban Law, but that wouldn't be accurate because we've been dark for a while.
We have.
Yeah. And we have a lot of interesting stuff to report back.
That's a really just part of the M&A process. We try to move things as quickly along as we can, but sometimes it just takes time. And so little things take a few weeks to have happen. So it doesn't feel as if much progress happens. And then poof, all of a sudden things start to move. So there's a bit of a lull. So we've been a little quiet because there hasn't been a whole lot to discuss, but things are certainly starting to move now.
Our listeners may remember in our last show, we announced that we had an LOI. And then once we got the LOI, there's a lot of logistical things and challenges with schedules that just really slow things down. We had holidays. One of my partners had surgery. So it was like a lot of these complicated things to try to get everybody on the phone and get everything done. But I'm happy to say that we made some progress. So I was thinking today, just to bring everybody up to speed, the fastest way to do it is we just take it in a chronological order. Maybe I'll lead us through it and then you can just add any of the details as we're going.
Perfect. I think that's great.
Well, once we got the LOI signed, which, that was back in March, the first thing we needed to do was we needed to present the LOI to my partners. I think it's important that we explain to our listeners why that's an essential step to the process.
Absolutely. So in an operating agreement, for those who maybe don't have one, it really governs and talks about how the business is supposed to be run day to day, especially when there's multiple partners involved, as is in this case. And so there's essentially a set or cadence of things that have to take place. And so the first big milestone was getting the LOI, but the next critical piece was then, informing the partners, and in this case, the partners who are the managing members, that there's been an offer, that this transaction now is ready to move to its next phase and stage, and those partners now need to engage into the process. So it's essentially bringing them into the fold now and moving on to the next step. So it's important to let them know.
Yeah, and as soon as that started, then almost immediately after that, we had a partners meeting. And at that partners meeting, we gave all the partners an opportunity to talk about what their expectations were and what their concerns were. And it's just proper, but a lot of operating agreements would make it a requirement that you have to do that.
That's exactly right. And that partner meeting you had is equally as important because, we tell clients all the time that there's needs and strategic motivations for the business, but then there's also needs and strategic motivations of all the individuals who are a part of that business. And so you want to make sure that everybody's needs and desires are being heard, if not met. And the only way to do that is to start by having those conversations. And so the notice served as our way to start for you and your partners to have that conversation and set those expectations in order to get things moving. And that way everybody knows what everyone wants and needs, and clear kind of as a way to set the stage for what comes next.
Yeah. It didn't feel like we lost a lot of time because while that was going on, we continued, I want to almost call it's like preliminary due diligence with the buyer. Mm-hmm. You had a number of conversations with them. I was on a couple of those calls where they brought their extended team into the fold and everybody had questions. How does this work? What about this? Like I said, you were on more of those calls than I. Mm-hmm. You might be able to, give a better feel, what can be done in that sort of purgatory section, limbo section,
right.
that sort of limbo section of the deal.
Yes, purgatory is actually not a bad description because it feels that way. It feels that way, especially because things move at such a rapid pace up to the LOI. And then it's a bit of a like, whew, like, wait, what happened? Where did that momentum go? It's not that it's not there. It's just to your point, the LOI stage and even those beginning partner meetings, like we were just talking, it's all very strategic. You're talking high level. Then you shift into the tactical. And that's where, they start doing some due diligence and asking the who, the what, the where, the when, how, who's responsible for what, how does this work, and really start digging in to the details. Because prior to an LOI, you don't go into all that detail because it takes time and effort and resources to do that. And so first, you want to make sure that at a strategic level and at a high level, everybody's good with the terms. And that's what an LOI does. Then you shift into the tactical. And that's when you, as I like to use the car analogy, you open up the hood, look to see how the engine actually runs. And that's what they started doing. And we started working with them and answering a lot of those day-to-day questions. And then there's a lot of history of why did it go this way or why does this work that way? What was the background and context? And so we had a lot of conversations around that, which I think has set us up for the positivity and where we are now because they've been able to get through that information, understand that why, and now can start to plan for what should the future look like.
Yeah, and it saves time too because, like I said, they brought in their extended team. Their extended team had a lot of questions that weren't answered during the LOI process. So now the table's set and we have the buyer and my partners have a phone conversation sort of to get to know each other. But this is an important call because both sides have to decide whether or not they're comfortable with each other. The call seems kind of matter of fact, but it really is an important call. I mean, you were on it. So give our listeners a flavor of what takes place in one of those calls.
Yeah, it's a bit kind of like dating. And to the first couple of calls, it's just people getting to know one another. Hi, my name is, here's my background, here's what I've done. You're essentially putting two folks together to become partners, which is kind of like a marriage. So there's a bit of a courting period. And so a lot of those conversations were just that around getting to know one another. And through that, it starts to become apparent how people and the organizations are going to work well together. So we started with just a introductory call. And then we had a couple others where we started talking more about back to those personal motivations and company motivations. We started talking strategy and here's what we envision for this organization. Here's what we as the other party views the vision, and they lined up well, which is great. Sometimes they don't. Sometimes you get into that and you're like, ooh, it's not quite a match. But in this case, the synergies really jumped out, which is great. Through the whole process in prospecting an acquirer, you always want to look for that value, find where those puzzle pieces come together. We particularly take the time to really do that. So then it came very abundantly clear that we'd made that match, that value out in these subsequent calls, which was great to see. We moved from those calls to the team met in person. Again, it's important to be able to look in the eye the people you're going to work with and again, get to know them, right? So it's kind of like I said, we're dating. We've had a few dates. Now we're getting a little more serious and now moving towards something more permanent. And so it's a bit of a progression. And, it's funny, we've been quiet, but all that happened over probably a 2 to 3 week period.
You talk about it dating. In this particular case, it's a little bit more like an arranged marriage.
It's actually true.
Yeah.
Good.
And okay, so that kind of brings us up to where we are right now. So the next step in the process is the buyers have some obligations within their organization that make it necessary to make some amendments to the operating agreement so that they're not in violation of some of their other agreements. Is that a fairly common occurrence to amend an operating agreement?
Absolutely. It's almost 100% of the time it gets changed. And that's because you've got new parties and a new business vision and a new set of circumstances. When operating agreements are written, they're written to reflect the people at the time, the investors at the time, that, the people who are in the business, the vision of those people for the business and what they're looking for it to do. And, the resources those people are going to bring and how they're going to execute. When you bring in a new entity into that fold, what worked then won't work now because you've got different people with different resources. And now maybe the strategy is different. In this case, there's a huge strategic opportunity because the buyer in this case is very well connected and has a lot to offer. And so what may work for you in the past doesn't reflect where it's going to go in the future, and all parties understand that. An operating agreement is essentially the rules of the game. And so everyone needs to agree to what those look like and how the game's going to be played going forward. So it's really important.
Yeah, that makes sense. That makes sense. So concurrently, while we're negotiating the amendments to the operating agreement, we get right into the due diligence. I mean, we did a whole show on due diligence, but if there's any potential legal action, if there's any settlements, like the due diligence process can get pretty intense. I'm not sure how far this one will go, but usually they're pretty thorough.
They are. It's almost like an audit. And for those who've never had an audit before, that's why it feels extra daunting. And also when it's your business and people start poking and asking questions, and it's not, malicious or judgmental, they're just asking why, but it can feel that way. And so it's always the part of the process that people really dislike the most. It's the most painful. And also, once you're getting your operating agreement redone and you're talking strategically and you're talking operationally and you're planning for the future, you're really excited and want to get to that future. So due diligence can be a bit of a deflator, it takes the wind out a bit because it is so tedious and so thorough. We've seen, regardless of size of company or even the structure, much like this one, which is a little unique, they'll bring a team of people in and look through everything, look through all the expenses. How does money come in and who's responsible for what and who gets paid what and how does it work and what have they been paid historically and are all the compliance filings done? And sometimes they'll want to go as far as calling on customers to make sure the customers are happy and that there isn't a flight risk of customer. I mean, there's a whole laundry list of things that can be done. And sometimes the breadth of the due diligence and the speed is also predicated on how much risk a buyer is willing to take in order to move quickly. And so sometimes they'll weigh that risk with just wanting to get things done. For example, if you're a retailer and there's a certain time of year that sales are high, if I'm a buyer, I want to get in before that period because I want to reap the benefit of that growth period. You want to get in soon. So maybe you'll say, hey, I'm willing to pull back on some of this due diligence so that we can get this done a little bit faster. I'm willing to assume that risk. We've seen due diligence last anywhere from a couple of days to 6 months.
Yeah.
It really varies by organization and how many parties are at the table and how much they have a desire to want to really dig in.
Okay. Well, before we wrap up, let's do some housekeeping. First, thanks for all the emails that everyone sent us. Hopefully today's show answered your questions. But if you have additional questions or comments or ideas, anything, just please send us at connect@mjbulls.com. And I always want to thank Jamie Humiston for composing the music and Dena for being such a loyal co-host on the show. Thanks again for doing this, Dena.
It's my pleasure. It's a lot of fun. I love doing it. I'm glad we were able to get back to it.
Yeah, me too. Well, our goal is to get this done by the end of the month. So hopefully we're going to have a lot more opportunities to get together. So well, have a good week, Dena, and our listeners, everyone have a great week, and we will see you again next Sunday on Cashing Out.